Hello everyone, this is your friend Naruto Nexus 2.0 and we are back with a new fanfic. What if Minato fought the hidden stone from the inside? Part 1. I was in hell. Or at least I thought I was, when I finally reached the mental acuity necessary to process visual information. It was a reasonable assumption to make, as I was surrounded by crude huts made out of stone and wood. All of which were ablaze. Thick clouds of smoke clogged the air just above me, so I wouldn't know if there was a night sky with stars or the craggy roof of an enormous cave. I felt scalding heat on my skin, and there was screaming too, a lot of it. No doubt the screams of the damned. I could see motionless bodies all around me, many smoldering, and I could smell the familiar stench of the dead and dying. Yep, must be hell. They didn't have a whole lot of fire at the bottom of the Baltic Sea, and I vividly remembered my death. Remembered the beeps on my radar, the thunderous crash as the torpedo hit, throwing us out of our chairs and shattering the bulbs over our heads. Remembered how we were cast into unforgiving darkness until the dim, flickering emergency lights kicked on and bathed everything in muted red. Remembered my own silent horror reflecting on the faces of every crewmate in the control room as we felt the vessel we entrusted our lives to groan underfoot. Then, reality sank in, and we all blitzed into frantic action. I had ordered my crew to surface as quickly as possible. Decompression sickness was the least of our concerns. I regret those orders now. Implosion would have granted us a quick death. We rose just high enough to avoid catastrophic failure, but not high enough to have any hope at reaching the surface. Instead, freezing water began to rush in. I had always adored the ocean, and I think I still do. But feeling it slowly climb up my skin, inch by inch, felt like the ultimate betrayal. Finally, my beloved Indy, the USS Indianapolis, my pride and joy, ripped in half, and I along with my beloved crew were sucked out into the freezing ocean. Dark, but for the glimmering, golden sun above. Tauntingly out of reach. Saltwater seared my lungs as they filled against my will. I was too numb to thrash, and it would accomplish nothing anyway. My vision darkened around the edges, and my last thoughts were the first prayer I'd made in years. Maybe, if I had been more devout, and not an instrument of pointless war, I wouldn't have wound up here. God damn it. Wait, should I say that here? Maybe I should try and get on the big man's good side. Ah, screw it. I was already in hell, and I'm pretty sure the damned don't get let out early on good behavior. By God, it was loud. Both from the screaming and from the crash of fire-ravaged buildings as they collapsed. I tried to get up, but found that my legs couldn't support me. I could barely even manage to position them under myself. Annoyed and panicked, I tried to at least cover my ears, but I didn't have the strength to lift my arms either. There was a body near me, belonging to a woman that might have once had dark hair, though now it was almost all burned away along with her scalp and the entirety of her back. I could tell she had frantically rolled on the dirt road, trying in vain to put it out, something I thought should have worked. The fires of hell must be unnaturally fierce, however, because she died with her face twisted in agony and desperation. How can a person die in hell? Was she double dead? Did she get sent to turbo hell? If she redeemed herself during her time here, would she go to heaven? Or did PEMDAS happen and she got sent up one level to purgatory? I hope she ended up someplace better than here. For some reason, I felt some kinship with her. Like she was important. But I had no idea why. The strangest thing about the woman was how giant she was. If she stood, my eyes would have only matched up to her knee, if that. As I surveyed my surroundings, I realized that I must have been sent to giant hell by mistake, because everything appeared to be scaled up. The doors on the houses, the metal braziers alongside the road, which were, ironically, the only things not on fire, and even the braying goat headbutting a wooden fence in a frantic attempt to escape were all massive. Goats in hell. Huh, I had seen the devil portrayed as a goat in movies, so maybe that wasn't so strange. A tendril of smoke made it into my airways, and I coughed. And kept coughing, the sound strangely high-pitched to my own ears. Breaths came shallower and shallower, My throat burned, and I tasted blood as my ravaged throat turned raw. It was awful, and I tried to rein in the involuntary reaction. Tucking my chin and clenching all the muscles in my neck, I attempted to build up saliva in my mouth for lubrication. I must have been severely dehydrated, because it took a long time. Furious with myself and my circumstances, I scowled into the blazing village. Hell needed someone to upgrade their infrastructure. This shithole looked like it was built in the Dark Ages. Maybe, if I see a demon soon, I could make a bargain. I'm no civil engineer, but I have some basic mechanical knowledge I was forced to pick up in the Navy, and I knew how to make asphalt. Even Hell's inhuman punishers must be able to see value in paved roads. I might even see one of Hell's keepers now. The only living, conscious, thing I've encountered yet, slowly creeping towards me. It was hard to see from this distance, but I could tell from his body language that he was rather shell-shocked. Not a demon, then. A survivor. I had seen such behavior before, most notably when I had made port the first and only time in Latvian waters. Riga had suffered terrible air raids, but we needed to make repairs and the survivors would do anything to pay back at their aggressors, even at their own continued risk. As they led us through bombed-out residentials and shattered ruins of what they might have considered skyscrapers, I saw this same numb look of incomprehension on their faces, as if they couldn't so much as process the atrocity leveled against them. But as the person, a boy, he might have been a giant but his face was clearly young, drew nearer, I could tell that he was different. He was uninjured, for one, and his clothes were nice, if a little strange. A flowy red tunic that he was all but swimming in covered up most of his figure. The left sleeve was loose and long, but the right was missing altogether, revealing a bare, toned arm carrying some sort of knife. A soldier, then, I realized. Green, almost literally. He looks like he's about to puke. He's lucky he made it to the battlefield so late. But why were there soldiers in Hell? Was the underworld going through some sort of civil war? If so, I might just find an interesting way to spend my eternal damnation after all. Hey, I tried to call out, but the sound came out unintelligible and was overtaken by more wet, racking coughs. Not wanting his first impression to be of me choking, I quickly smothered them as the cloying taste of iron coated my tongue. But the sound had captured his attention. Taicho, he called out shakily. You need to see this. Another giant came into view, this one much older. He had a full beard, a brown bandana with a metal plate, and an outfit that almost matched the kid's. Only, he had what appeared to be a brown combat vest over the red garment. Since his right sleeve was also missing, I could tell he was incredibly buff, and not with stunt muscles either. He had the same build as Sir, my father, minus the gut I'd always known him to have. A child, he rumbled, and the illusion was broken. I'd never met anyone in my life who had a voice like that. It was low and melodic. It sounded like how cigarettes taste. Then my brain processed his words. Child. I looked down, and found my fingers to be disproportioned and pudgy. I tried to make a fist, scarcely believing my eyes, but my fingers were slow to respond. So I wasn't in Hell for giants. I had been de-aged. Or reborn entirely. Why isn't it crying? A girl looking to be the same age as the first boy, who was all but clinging to her superior's metaphorical skirts, asked. I would have taken offense at the selected pronoun, but I likely would have used the exact same phrasing in her place. Is he even alive? The boy echoed. Okay. It was permissible, but I would have said something just to with him, though I wasn't sure my tongue had the dexterity to manage such a feat. But it didn't matter, because if I unclenched my throat muscles even slightly, I'd be thrown into another cug. Hing fit regardless. Instead, I blinked lazily at him. So creepy, the girl whispered. Again, fair play. It's just sitting there, in Caesar. Isn't it scared of the fire? Cammy, it's right next to its mother's corpse. Quote, oh, was that my mother? I looked back at the burned woman. She did seem to be reaching out towards me, with desperation fixed by rigor upon her face. That explained the sense of familiarity I felt. Even though I didn't know the woman, I couldn't help but feel a little sad. I hadn't had a mother in my past life, I guess the streak continues. She's a baby, their leader said, and I internally thanked him for his observational skills. Babies aren't known for their ability to think. Quote, I bet he would be a great singer. She's still an Earth country citizen. We'll take her with us, and any other survivors we find if they can be transported. As he surveyed the burning remains of the village, his face was a mask of fury. Those Konoha bastards. Iwagakure will never forget this. Wait. What? Wannabe. Important authors note ~plz read. Hey y'all. Thanks for giving this FIC a shot. It's an ambitious project, so I hope you enjoy reading it as much as I enjoy writing it. First, some logistical things. This first chapter was a short introduction, preface. Expect all future ones to be considerably longer. I'll try my best to release a new chapter every week. This story will be cross-posted on AO3. Also, this FIC assumes that you have a decent familiarity with the Naruto world, Naruto fanfic in particular, as well as gamer mechanics. But even if you don't have either of these things, you should still be able to enjoy the story. I imagine y'all aren't sure what to expect with this FIC, so here's a brief explanation of my vision. Despite the title and description, this is a gamer FIC. However, it is one unlike any that I have ever encountered in any fandom. I've worked hard to make the gamer abilities that our protagonist will eventually possess make sense in the context of the universe. There is no system, no dungeons or the like, no perks and no skills, as you know them. Instead, our main character invents her own chakra abilities around her desire to become a gamer, hence the story's original name, Wannabe Gamer of Iowa. Expect a fresh, unique take on Fuinjutsu and a lot of introspection concerning the nature of chakra. A lot of world building, especially regarding the history and actions of Iwagakure. Canon development on this region is lacking to say the least. A dive into ninja biology and eventually the summoning realm. And a bit of an unfriendly rivalry between the protagonist and one Namikaze Minato. The time period this story takes place in is not very well developed in canon. I've done a great deal of research, and found numerous inconsistencies, a great lack of detail in many pieces that flat out do not make sense. I initially wanted to use canon events, basically, as fence posts, while using my artistic liberty to fill in the gaps between them. I'll still try to do this wherever I can, but after all my research, I've decided strictly incorporating all bits of canon lore will only make the quality of story as a whole suffer. So if there are inaccuracies, please know that they are intentional. This also applies to the power system, especially considering Fuinjutsu, which is a focus of this story. I think this community, judging from other fics I've read, is rather tolerant, welcoming of this sort of thing. Asano Kazuhiro had lost more than he ever thought he could. His parents were both shinobi, career chunin as he was himself. Only, they were among the first casualties in the Second Shinobi World War, and he continued to stumble his way through battlefield after battlefield, surviving more so than fighting. Like almost all of his class, he hadn't passed the rigorous graduation exam in the academy, and thus didn't get assigned to a team with a Jonin sensei. Instead, he was tossed into the cesspool that was the Genin Corps to die, taking a kunai in the place of more valuable shinobi. It was a miracle that pulled him out of what was a dead end for most, earning him a field promotion for striking a killing blow on a ranked enemy he could never hope to match without the corpses of his entire squadron behind him. Then, Hisashi had lost his arm, and Kazuhiro had been disgusted with himself for how ecstatic that had made him. A shinobi who could inform hand signs was all but useless on the battlefront, where mid to long range ninjutsu reigned supreme, so he had been forced into an early retirement. After a fashion, the Sandaime Tsuchikage had stationed him in Fugataro, a small village well behind their line, as a middling defense between the lands of grass and earth. Now, Kazuhiro was able to visit him much more frequently, as he barely had to alter his course to pass through Fugataro on his way back from the courier missions he almost exclusively seemed to be sent on nowadays. Hisashi's injury had initially sent the man into a depression, but after a year he slowly began to come to peace with it. No doubt his new wife had something to do with that. Omori Mana was in much the same position, though Hisashi had confided to him that her career-ending injury had been internal. Kazuhiro had never felt comfortable inquiring further, even though both of them had insisted, despite their lack of share blood, that they were all family. One that would have a new addition soon, as Mana became pregnant by the time Kazuhiro had gotten the chance to meet her. That would have gotten most kunoichi in serious trouble, so Kazuhiro kept it a secret, despite never asking his godfather if it truly needed TOB. They might have gotten permission for all he knew. With Mana's disability, this might have been the best way she could contribute to the future of Iwagakure. It didn't matter in the end because, on his return trip to Iwagakure with messages from the front, he found Fugataro burned to the ground, with 4 genin barely out of the academy digging mass graves. What happened here? He asked hoarsely as one softened the earth with a jutsu, seemingly not proficient enough to fully excavate the dirt. Leaf attack, a girl said shortly, a pitying glance given as she correctly interpreted his loss. Our contingent was caught off guard and overwhelmed by the strike force. Any survivors? He whispered numbly. Some, the girl said, and a spark of hope ignited within him. They've all been taken back to Iowa. Without another word, he took off in a dead sprint. Wannabe. Nagai Tsuneo stepped into a room filled with scrubs and lab coats and left a completely different person. It was a cruel and depressing irony that the Henge no Jutsu, transformation technique, was his most commonly used jutsu these days, surpassing even his medical techniques. Any witnesses might have assumed that Tsuneo was an infiltrator, and would have attempted to either kill him or rat him out to someone who could. However, a spy or traitor he was not. He was supposed to be here, in this hospital, Henge and all. The deception was a necessary step to hide the fact that Magaki's show only had one medic nin, him. The rest were false identities, created at Lord Tsuchikage's behest and regarded as an A-rank secret. Goya-sensei. A voice called out, breaking him from his reverie. He turned his head to see a panting nurse, if she could be called that. The girl was only 13, and Tsuneo doubted she would last another month in his hospital. Very few ever did. Yes, he snapped. There's a man here, inquiring about the child. Ah, yes, the child. A relative, he questioned. Possibly, she said quickly. We're not sure yet, with all the confusion. He is asking to see her to be certain. Excellent. I was just heading to the burn unit now. Bring him there, he instructed. A minute later, he was running diagnostics over the melted face of a middle-aged man he was keeping in a chakra-induced coma, when the door opened noisily. The nurse, he couldn't recall if he had ever bothered to learn her name, led in a young man in a chunin vest, eyes red-rimmed and shoulders slump. With grief. Please apply salve B6 to this patient's burns, he told her, and she scampered off to obey his directives as he turned his attention to the new arrival. Good afternoon, Tsuneo said softly, adopting a tone more appropriate to the circumstances. The visitor gave a short, bitter laugh. No, it's not. Tsuneo nodded, sympathetically. It's not, he agreed. I'm sorry for your loss. I heard you might have ties to one of our patients. Maybe, the youth said roughly, swaying on his feet. My godfather and his wife were murdered in the attack. His wife was due around a month ago, while I was away on an extended assignment. I was on my way to meet my god sibling when he trailed off with a shuddering breath, and Sueno wasn't cruel enough to make him finish. We don't have any identification, he told the boy. The ones who received her at this facility kept her original garments, but none of them are especially unique. You're more than welcome to see them, if you think it might help. He shook his head. Can I just see her? Tsuneo nodded, gently guiding him towards the back corner of the room. while the other beds were closely crammed together, separated by pipe and white drapes that smelled strongly of bleach. This incubator sat apart with as much space as possible between it and the rest. Inside, the newborn lay so perfectly still that, if not for the steady blip of the heart monitor, Tsuneo would have thought she was dead. On her face was a tiny breathing mask hooked up to a crinkled tube. She escaped the fire itself, but she must have inhaled some smoke. SIDS is not out of the question, he warned. Fortunately, she has responded well to my medical ninjutsu, and I've cleared out her lungs. But there is already internal scarring, and it's too risky and not urgent enough to try and fix it at this stage. Her voice will likely never develop properly. I'm not certain I care yet, the young man responded, and Tsuneo couldn't blame him for the bluntness. If he had suffered such a loss, and if it wasn't his job, he probably wouldn't care about a random infant either. Do you see any defining similarities? He asked, knowing it didn't really matter. As a medic nin, he knew better than most that the brain would show a person whatever similarities or dissimilarities they wanted to see. If the young man wanted to take the kid, he would, and if he didn't, he wouldn't. Then, the child's eyes snapped open, a perfectly ordinary brown, and the young man sighed. She's Hisashi's. She has his eyes. Tsuneo, if he weren't a better shinobi, would have sighed in relief. He was well acquainted with the orphanage matron, and he knew what dire straits the facility was in. No pleasant future would await the child there. Excellent. In that case, he prompted, I owe it to my godfather to care for her, but I don't know if I have the means, the boy said. I'm not even sure they'll wait for tomorrow to reassign me. Quote, were her parents shinobi? Tsuneo asked, receiving a nod in response. I have the authority to write birth certificates. I'm certain no one who matters would take issue with me officially recognizing her surname despite not being present for her birth, making her the heir to her parents' account. Shinobi wages were delivered through a centralized bank, which meant each of them were required to have accounts. If the young man was lucky, they'd have some funds saved up to help provide for their daughter. It will be a simple matter for you to adopt her, giving you full access to them. Taking into account Iowa's current priorities, the process wasn't nearly as thorough as it ought to have been. And regarding your reassignment, quote, he glanced down at the patch on the boy's vest. 7th Division, and a courier. In other words, he was little more than a body, as far as Iowa was concerned. Yes, will of stone and all that. Every piece had its time. But, as things currently stood, he was little more than fodder on the battlefield. Unfortunately, I do believe you've come down with a case of chakra poisoning, he stated. I apologize, but given the current occupancy of this hospital and your rank, I cannot authorize the use of medical chakra to clear out your pathways. It will take a month to resolve naturally. During that time, I must insist that you stay within the village to rest, and you are forbidden from any usage of chakra until you have fully recovered. I'm sorry, but my verdict is final, and a report will find its way to your commander's desk. Thank you, sensei. I have done nothing for which you should be thankful for, Tsuneo said smoothly. We are each doing our solemn duty to Iowa and her future. On that note, I need to collect some information in order to draft her birth certificate. He pulled out a pencil and pad of paper. Father, Amai Hisashi, he said, voice thick. Mother, Omori Mana. Date of birth, well, she's clearly only a month old, so we'll say, April 16th. How does that sound? He received a nod of agreement. Then finally, we need a name. Did your godfather share any prospective names with you? No, was the short response. Then you must decide on one. It was unfair to force the young man to name a human on the spot. Parents would agonize for months or even years over the task, but there wasn't much of an alternative. It seemed, however, that the child's new guardian had an idea. As he looked up from the ground, Tsuneo could see the hatred in his eyes. Kasai. He whispered, visibly shuddering in fury as the name left his lips. Kasaiki. She who will burn forests to the ground. The wildfire. The destroyer. Her name gave Tsuneo goosebumps. Are you sure that's the future you want for her? He attempted. A name is a powerful thing. I do not say this as a reproach or with judgment. But people may treat her differently. She deserves to be treated differently, the young man said stiffly. She is the daughter of two disabled and retired jonin, murdered just 1 month after her birth by Konoha shinobi. Kaseki is her past and her future. Tsuneo sighed heavily, because in the end it was never his choice. Kaseki, then, the medic nin finally murmured, writing down the 3 kanji. And the last name, you said, was Amai. Quote. He nodded. It will certainly turn heads. All the while, said child stared at them with a frankly unnatural level of comprehension. She remained entirely motionless as always, but for the occasional lazy blink. Amai Kaseki was, unfortunately, not the first or even second baby he had treated for smoke inhalation. But she was the first to live. The others had cried their heads off, choking on their own blood until their tiny lungs collapsed. But Kaseki never made a peep, even after he rinsed her entire respiratory system out with a delicate application of Sweden. He knew from people with the ability to speak that the process was incredibly uncomfortable, but all this child did was clench her fists. See me for a checkup in a month's time, he said to the oddity's new guardian. Regarding your case of chakra poisoning, some symptoms you might experience are shortness of breath, bouts of dizziness, fatigue, or pain in one or more of the gates. Everyone heals at a different rate, and it is possible you might need more time than I projected to fully recover. His gaze flitted back to the incubator. Amai-chan will have to stay for a couple more days. Use that time to secure her adoption and purchase the necessary supplies. Stop by the front desk, and we can share some literature with you. Now, if you'll excuse me. Goya-sensei had to make a house call. And while he was away, Higa-sensei had more work to do. If anyone noticed that they, along with the other 4 medic nin attending Magaki show, were never in the same room together, they had the good sense to keep their mouths shut. Wannabe. The land of frost wasn't nearly as inhospitable as its name suggested, which should have been obvious to anyone possessing the ability to read a basic map. It was right next to the land of hot springs, after all, the country known for its year-long summers. The land of frost was mostly named after the snow-capped mountains that ran up the coast and deep into the land of lightning, and after the early morning dew that froze into intricate patterns before being melted away by the midday sun. Right at Kumogakure's doorstep, the country had been heavily occupied for the duration of the Second Shinobi World War by foreign powers. Now, at a particularly unassuming inlet off the western coast, it would host a most unusual meeting that would change the course of the elemental nations forever. I feel I should be insulted, the much larger of the assembled duo growled, baring teeth filed into points. He had auburn hair styled into 2 buns, possessed green, triangular markings along his cheeks and carried a sword as impressively massive as he was on his back, secured with leather straps ND bound in blood-stained bandages. And why is that? The far more normal looking of the two asked, trying not to stare at the tiny skull on its pommel. He could have sworn it had just wriggled. We are at the Raikage's doorstep, and yet he sends a child to speak on his behalf. Quote, it speaks more to the Raikage's trust in me than any disrespect towards you, Kenshi-san, he quickly assured the powerful shinobi. I may be younger than you, but I am a jonin, and the Raikage's personal attendant and advisor. I already act on his behalf much of the time, and with a topic as urgent as this, I am the only one who can negotiate in his stead while he fights on the front lines. The giant scoffed, but his body language grew a touch less hostile. Fine then, where's the other one? How should I know? I don't need to worry. A new voice cut in, and they both looked up to see a woman hovering above them, arms splayed to each side. Hoisting her into the air were hundreds of wasps, and though there were so many of them, neither of the RS could so much as hear a trace of buzzing from insects' wingbeats. The Sandame was most curious about the subject of this meeting, the woman stated as the insects deposited her to the ground. The Kumo delegate nearly shuddered as the creatures all wormed their way under the hems of her garment. So I pray you will not waste my time. Kamizuru Kimiko, the giant man identified, giving a satisfied nod. That's more like it. Fuguki Suikazan, she returned, not deigning to offer the Raikage's assistant more than a dismissive glance. He struggled to keep himself from rolling his eyes. The woman would probably try to kill him, and he wasn't quite sure he could stop her. You're bigger in person, she deadpanned. How anyone expects me to believe that you are the greatest stealth specialist in the elemental nations with that bulk? I'll never know. The swordsman's eyes flashed at the challenge, and the Kumo Jonin decided to cut in before a fight broke out. We'd best begin our discussion, he said, quickly. The Raikage would like to propose a temporary alliance, centered around the fulfillment of a certain goal. Quote, a certain goal, the Kamizuru clan heir mused. One certain goal, but not a simple one, he claimed. Iwagakure, Kurigakure, Kumogakure. We are almighty, but still we are forced to the outskirts of the continent. Meanwhile, the Central East, some of the most fertile and wealthy land in the elemental nations, is controlled by an alliance consisting of Takigakure, Kusagakure, and of course, Konohagakure. Their armies are mainly contending with Suna for now, though I believe they are acting out against Iwa as well. Is that correct, Kamizuru-san? Don't ask questions you already know the answer to, she said, unimpressed. Of course. Well, Konoha will win against Suna. The Sandmen put up a better fight than we expected, but their defeat was always a foregone conclusion. However, it gives us an opportunity, one to finally crack the lock they have over this region. It's not something Kumo can do alone. Kiri has stayed out of this war, so far, the giant said. It suits us to grow in strength as our rivals weaken one another. Quote, oh, but Kiri is the hidden village that stands to gain the most from this venture, the Kumo delegate proclaimed, and the giant regarded him for a moment before waving his hand testily. Spit it out then, he rumbled. I have no patience for these games. We have discovered that there is one unifying link between these allied countries, the delegate revealed. You both know it well, I'm sure. A not-so-little island off the eastern coast of the Land of Fire. Right between it and Kiri, as a matter of fact. Uzushio, the giant identified immediately. They've been a pain in our asses for decades. Why would Kumo or Iwa care about it? Because their export, seals, are what unites Konoha, Taki and Kusa. And although not militarily aligned, they play a big role in Konoha's trade with the Land of Tea as well. If we can get rid of their seal masters, they will turn on one another like dogs fighting over scraps. Quote, that seems like a stretch, Kimiko stated. I should think it would be more likely for Konoha to take revenge at all costs. How could they? The Kumo representative countered. Our proposed plan is for you, Iwa, to engage the Konoha army as soon as they defeat Suna, before they retreat from T. Air Western Front. Kumo will rendezvous with an arm of Kiri's forces in the Land of Dreams, where they will provide us transportation over the treacherous waters surrounding Uzu. Meanwhile, the bulk of Kiri's forces will engage them from the south, catching Uzushio between a hammer and an anvil. Our two villages will do the dirty work of taking the village. Konoha won't have time to react, and they'll be so beaten by the end of it they won't be able to retaliate. It still seems like a lot of work for an ambiguous payout, Kimiko stated. The broken alliance is only the greatest short-term benefit, the advisor claimed. Their seals pose a great threat to us all, and have wreaked devastation on each of our armies at some point in the past. All while foiling our attempts at retaliation. I don't wish to dredge up ancient history, but I'm quite certain there are specific instances that must come to both of your minds. It was never strategically advantageous to reveal to an enemy which of their misdeeds had been uncovered. They might use that information to plug holes in their security. Additionally, there are the Biju to consider, the Kumo Nin continued. The Shidaime Hokage charitably gifted them to us, but do you truly think it was as a gesture of goodwill as he claimed? When the only ones who can truly control the monsters reside in Konoha and Uzushio. The Mokuten may have been lost with the first, but they still have plenty of Uchiha, along with Uzumaki. The Jinchuriki we welcomed into the hearts of our villages are exploding tags that Konoha can detonate almost a T-will. Powerful assets they may be, but how long until they're turned against us? Welcomed into the hearts of our villages. Kimiko sneered. Speak for yourself. We of Iowa are not so naive. Our Jinchuriki aren't allowed to set foot in the village proper for that very reason. Quote, but wouldn't you rather not worry about the issue at all? He pressed. Wouldn't you like to be able to deploy one of your greatest military assets without them being constrained and corrupted by the Uzumaki's seals and adamantine chains? Quote, I see through your flowery words, the Kiri delegate spoke up. The Raikage isn't gracious enough to do the dirty work. He scoffed the words. Himself. Removing a threat isn't your sole objective. You wish to take their power for your own. Their precious sealing guides, their texts. All for Kumo. Along with some of their bloodlines as well, Kimiko said, wrinkling her nose. It certainly wouldn't be the first time. I do recognize you by the way, Mr. Advisor. I've seen the bingo book entry of Otake Dodai, if that is your real name. How did the lava release end up in the land of lightning, I wonder? It is native to Iowa, as I'm sure you know. Quote, elemental bloodlines arise on occasion as a result of random mutation, he said stiffly. I have a comrade with the magnet release as well, which had previously only been seen in Suna. Funny, she sneered. Funny how these random mutations only ever seem to pop up in Kumo. We in Iowa have never benefited from a random mutation, have any in your village, Fuguki-san? None that I'm aware of, the swordsman answered. I thought not. She shifted her posture, and the Kumo nin stiffened as killing intent began to trickle out of her like melted snow from atop Frost's mountains after the first caress of the morning sun. It stung his skin, literally. He tried not to let the pain show. If you're going to plunder Uzu, leaving us to shoulder the burden of distracting Konoha and all of their outrageous clans, then we will get some of the reward. Quote, Kiri as well, the other cut in. It's called the whirling tides for a reason. Do you think you can navigate the seas yourselves? Dodai sighed. This is something our esteemed Cage will have to hash out amongst themselves, I believe. Aside from that minor objection, what are your thoughts? The Mizukage may be interested, the Kiri nin responded after a moment's thought. As you said, Uzushio has been a thorn in our side for decades. Quote, I will relay the message to Lord Tsuchikage, Kimiko allowed. After recent events, he wants his pound of flesh from Konoha. Thank the kami. Lord Raikage eagerly awaits their formal replies, Dodai said, too good to let his relief show. That he got out of this alive, much less with a maybe, was more than he could have possibly hoped for going into this meeting. Wannabe. N. SID stands for Sudden Infant Death Syndrome, in case anyone doesn't know. I did thorough research on the Second Shinobi War, and it doesn't make any sense. Much of the fighting took place in the land of mountains. Who was allied with Konoha? Why? It's so far out of the way, Iowa is between them. And Kumo tried to invade AIM. They aren't nearly next to each other either. I've decided to simply scrap canon when it came to the specifics of this war, not that there was much information to begin with. I am not a Japanese speaker in any sense of the word, but I tried to do a considerable amount of research when coming up with names. Most were chosen with purpose, and I encourage you to look up their meanings. My greatest challenge was Kasaiki, which is derived from Kasai, meaning fire, and Ki, which means tree. From my understanding, many Japanese names, and this holds true in many cultures around the world as well, are centered around the parent's hopes for the child's future. Kazuhiro, furious and grieving, is hoping that Kasaiki will grow up to burn Konoha to the ground. Basically, he's swearing vengeance upon them, and stating that his grudge will be passed on to the child under his care. My headcanon is that Kushina isn't nearly the strongest adamantine chain wielder, and she was able to hold back the Kyuubi no problem. If a stronger Uzumaki is on the battlefield, I would consider it absolutely pointless or even dangerous to bring out a Biju. Wannabe. AN from the future. The reason for the first paragraph of this original note is that many sources that I was looking to were presented as canon, but were actually fanon. This will definitely not be the last time this issue rears its head throughout the duration of this story. I learn how to differentiate later, but many world-building details early on are built off of the fanon of others. I'd credit the originators, but 1. It's been so long that I can't find the sources I was utilizing, and 2. I'm somewhat cross at them for being so misleading. You can take me out of the ocean, but. Status. It was nighttime, and the hospital, or this room at least, was still and silent. But there was a window that let in just enough moonlight for me to see my reflection staring back at me from the domed, glass interior of my incubator. Status. Still nothing. Maybe I did have to say it out loud. I tried to force the sounds out, but my tongue was pudgy, sluggish and difficult to move. Ta-da! I choked out, the mask over my face stifling what little volume one could manage. My throat felt tight. The doctor had said something about scarring. I'd probably sound like an old smoker for the rest of this life. I was called mouthy a lot in my last one, so maybe this was yet another cruel trick of the fates. Just like being reborn in the Naruto universe and not being stuck in Kiri, or at least Konoha. God, I would have loved Kiri. I adored the ocean, and the ocean usually adored me. With chakra, I could have made the water do terrible and amazing things. I would have even preferred Suna to Aiwa. Desert it may be, but wind was half of what made the ocean the ocean. And I'd have to look at a map to be positive, but I believe Suna has direct access to a southern sea. Aiwa has a coast, but it borders a polar sea, and I'm significantly less fond of cold water, especially after my death. SZSZZ. Ta. Da. Z's, I tried to enunciate. Damn S's. Still, there was nothing militaristic, cruel Iwagakure I could do. War, even from my limited perspective, I could easily tell that one was going on, was nothing new to me either. Clanless orphan, I would take it in a heartbeat with no complaints. If I could just have goddamn gamer powers. But no, that would be too easy. I'm starting as a goddamn NPC, with no special abilities or inherited techniques to draw upon. I was toast. After letting myself wallow in self-pity and catastrophize for a minute, I decided to speedrun the 5 stages of grief. God. Kami. Kami. I can't believe this shit. I can't be alone and powerless in a world with giant chakra beasts and a powerful but barely developed magic system. And I can't be in Aiwa, the village famous for both being assholes and for losing every war. They're literally the 1900s Germany of the elemental nations. There's no way I'm going to be some nobody, forced to follow orders of dumbass military squares with political agendas. Hard-headed, isn't that what Aiwa prides itself on being? Well, I'll show them hard-headed. I'll be the hardest chick around. Wait. Pause. You know what I mean. Climbing the ranks is a must, though. There's got to be someone who'll help me on that front, right? Aiwa wasn't exactly well fleshed out in the story, but they are willing to cooperate during the Fourth Shinobi World War. Maybe they aren't as bad as the stories make them out to be. They might not be as lovey-dovey as Konoha, but I'm sure there will be an opportunity to impress someone up top in Ma. YBE get some special training. I just have to put on a good show. And Aiwa might lose a lot, but they're still considered one of the strongest hidden villages, powerful enough to stalemate Konoha in the Third War before the Yellow Flash showed up. I think. Yeah, and I'm used to a rigid military structure. I might be able to fit in here. Who am I kidding? There was a big difference between the US Navy and Iwagakure no Sato. Even Konoha committed war crimes on the regular, and this place by all accounts was a hell of a lot worse. I'll admit I don't have the best moral compass, but there are things even I can't abide by. I won't be able to do anything about that until I'm extremely high up in the village hierarchy, and how could a no-name orphan get to that stage? The only thing they probably respect here is strength, and even if I work my ass off, how could I possibly begin to compete with the big names in this world without a bloodline? I sighed, and I could feel the warm air condensing under my mask. With hard work, that's how. What use was there in despairing? I was an Iwagakure, I was an orphan, and I'm pretty sure I'm not from any fancy clan. If I was, I doubt I'd be left alone in a public hospital. There was nothing I could do right now to change any of that. But I did have some advantages. A mind advanced well beyond my peers, military experience, knowledge of the future, a rudimentary understanding of the power system, and the imagination of thousands of fanfic authors behind me. I couldn't change the circumstances of my rebirth, but I could prepare for the wars that I knew were coming. There were so many things I had to do to prepare, if I didn't want this life to be cut short just like my last one. I mean, not now, I'm only a month old, so I'm completely helpless. There's only one thing I can think of that I'm capable of right now. I closed my eyes, and began to meditate. Wannabe. Officially adopting a Mai Kaseki was as easy as the doctor said it would be. All it took was a quick visit to the citizenship office in the Internal Affairs building. The clerk was so relieved to be given a case pertaining to a citizen of Iwagakure, rather than a refugee seeking asylum that would have to undergo extensive vetting, that he shook Kazuhiro's hand after quickly amping his approval over the documents. The next part was far harder. Despite offering Kaseki's birth certificate and freshly stamped adoption records, it took an infuriating amount of work to convince the bank manager, a slimy man with a patchy beard and a weak chin, to allow him to merge the funds in Hisashi and Mana's accounts with his own. The man might have continued to deny his request if Kazuhiro's temper hadn't uncharacteristically reached a boiling point and he began shouting. The commotion caught the attention of another of the bank's patrons waiting in line, a jonin who was in bedway. Assignments. As Kazuhiro explained the situation, frustrated tears in his eyes, the jonin, a bearded man who looked the part, fixed his gaze on the teller. He's telling the truth, he said, shortly. It was my team that found the girl and brought her back to Iowa. If he is willing to raise her, he will be doing the village a great service. Give him the money. The smarmy man was far less confident now. I'm sorry, he attempted, dabbing the sweat off his temples. There are protocols in place, you see. We have to look into the request, and conduct an investigation. The jonin reached out and grabbed the stone sill of the teller's window. I'm not sure you heard me, he said as killing intent began to permeate the air, drawing curious and nervous looks from the rest of the shinobi waiting in line. Give him the damn money. The teller swallowed. Okay. He folded. Yes, I will. I'll grab the form, and you just have to wait a few days for processing. There was a loud snap as the hand clenched around the sill, shattering the stone in his grip. The teller flinched at the sound, and at the crumbled pebbles that clattered onto his desk. No delays, the jonin said. He needs the money now. Do it, or you won't enjoy the consequences. Shakily, the teller updated the ledger, showing it to the jonin. Kazuhiro craned his neck to see, and his eyes widened at the figures. He knew it paid well to be a jonin, but damn. Obara Nanami, the jonin said suddenly. Arima Hideo. Tsutsui Seiji. These three of my comrades died without heirs or beneficiaries. They would want their funds added to this young man's as well. Quote. Both Kazuhiro and the teller jerked in shock at the claim. But, the teller stammered. He has no claim to their accounts. There's no way for me to justify to my superiors that their funds belong with him. Quote. So where do they belong, then? The jonin asked darkly. In your or your manager's pockets? No, the teller said, aghast as more judgmental eyes began to look his way. No, we would never. I can vouch that these men and women would rather have their unclaimed savings go to this man rather than rotting at the end of your ledger, the jonin said. So transfer them, now. The teller did, and Kazuhiro could have suffered a stroke when the man revealed his new balance. I don't know what to say, Kazuhiro whispered in awe to the Jonin. There is nothing to say, he claimed, the intensity of his eyes not letting up. This money is for the girl, understood? Not for you. If I hear of my comrade's savings being squandered in a gambling hall somewhere, the Tsuchikage himself won't be able to save you from my retribution. Quote, of course not, Kazuhiro said immediately. It will all go to her. Clothes, milk, whatever else babies need. He hadn't had time to review the material he had been given at the hospital yet. And when she's older, training equipment, the Jonin said, and Kazuhiro nodded readily in agreement. The daughter of two fallen heroes deserves to follow in her parents' footsteps. Having said his piece, he turned away before seeming to take an ounce of pity on the teller. If your superiors have a problem with this, he said, fixing the man with an impassive gaze over his shoulder. Tell them that Tsuchibakori no Biwa insisted. A tremble of both fear and awe shot down Kazuhiro's spine as he realized that he, and more specifically the child he was now the guardian of, had caught the eye of the Tsuchikage's eldest son. Wannabe. Now that he had funds, Kazuhiro's first order of business wasn't to secure a crib, clothes or even baby formula. It was to buy a house. Yes, he was technically homeless. Not that it really mattered. Kazuhiro was never in Iowa much to begin with. After his parents died, leaving him with barely over a tenth of what he had gotten from Hisashi's account alone, he had been forced to sell his childhood home and almost everything in it, finding an apartment instead to stay in. He earned far less than what the property should have been worth, as buying houses was incredibly low on everyone's priority whilst at war. He was just thankful to find a realtor who would purchase it at all. As the conflict ramped up, and he spent less and less time in the village, he decided it was time to cut his biggest and most unnecessary expense. So he stopped paying rent, and allowed himself to be evicted without a fight. The few nights he was inside the village, he would stay in its cheapest and shittiest hostel, which was a hell of a lot more affordable. But with Kaseki in the picture, he needed a more permanent residence. And with his bank account heavier than he could have ever possibly imagined, he went house hunting. It would probably be prudent to pick somewhere close to the one of the daycares, he mused. He couldn't stay out of active duty forever, and babies required a lot of attention. Luckily, this was an incredibly common problem in Iowa, and the village provided free services to shinobi parents in their absence. Free services weren't exactly known for their quality or effectiveness, however, especially with tensions inside the village being so high. He was worried that, if his house was a bit too inconvenient to reach, they might be late or otherwise reluctant to properly care for Kaseki. It wasn't something he would have even considered if not for the fact that many kunoichi in his academy class had been drafted into the service, and he led hearing them complain about it. Utterly overwhelmed, Kazuhiro let out a sound that was somewhere between a groan and a sob, leaning against the corner of a storefront and covering his eyes with a forearm. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know what he didn't know. And he didn't want to be a parent. All he wanted to do right now was cry, and rage, and maybe return to the front to kill a couple of leaf scum or die trying. But he owed it to Hisashi to take care of his newborn godsister, so he forced himself together and pressed on. His feet finally led him to a street he knew very well. He blinked out of his daze the moment a familiar house came into view, one that filled the few criteria he had. It was only 3 blocks down from the daycare and there wasn't too much space to maintain. He knew for a fact there were only 2 bedrooms and a single bathroom. It also had a shower and high fences to prevent snooping. Additionally, it just so happened to be his childhood home. He wasn't incredibly surprised to see a for sale sign hung up on the door. Clearly, the realtor had about as much luck flipping it for a profit as he had. It didn't take much more thought or consideration. He hunted down the owner and bought the property back, taking caustic satisfaction in the discovery that it cost less to buy it now than what he had sold it for. He was still bitter at the supposed loss in value all those years ago. On his way back, he ran into a couple brats who he offered to pay to clean the place for him while he worked to furnish his new old home. They agreed after some haggling, and by Kami Kazuhiro was glad to finally have money. He considered this a necessary expense for Kasaki's continued well-being, since their new home was doubtlessly filthy and dust couldn't be good for a baby's tiny lungs. And didn't the doctor say she already had respiratory issues? Yes, this was incredibly necessary. He found all the pieces of furniture he required easily enough. It was all second-hand, or perhaps 11th, and he spent the better part of the day lugging it all back to his home. As soon as he deemed that the brats had done a good enough job cleaning out the dust and cobwebs, he paid them and went to meet his neighbors. Not out of any desire for community, but out of hope that they would be parents willing to help him out in a pinch. He got the feeling that he would be running into quite a few of those. At the house across the street from his own, he struck gold. Kazu-kun, a matronly lady exclaimed the moment she laid eyes on him. My goodness, how long has it been? It took him an awkward amount of time to remember her name. Hamamoto-san, he greeted. It is very nice to see you again. Oh, call me Akane Obasan, she insisted, even though they had never been that close before he moved. Pointing that out would only hurt his cause, so he embraced the familiarity with open arms. Akane Obasan, he acquiesced with a strained smile. It's been too long. After the deaths of my parents, I was forced to sell our home to make ends meet. I beg your forgiveness for not bidding you a proper farewell, I was so distraught. There is nothing to forgive, she said firmly. You were so young, only 12. I can only imagine what that must have been like for you. Quote, it was not easy, he said, which was a massive understatement. But a shinobi is one who endures. It's in the name. Hamamoto-san clucked disapprovingly. But shinobi are human, I should know. I birthed one of them. Quote, thanked Kami. He had never known that Hamamoto-san had children. Given the woman's age, they were likely older than he was by a considerable margin. If they were still alive, he wouldn't ask in case they weren't. That conversation wasn't one he thought he could bear at the moment. On the topic of birth, he said, my godfather, I'm not sure if you ever met Amai Hisashi. He and his wife were killed by Leaf Nin, leaving behind a newborn daughter. Neither of us have any family to turn to, so I adopted her. Adopted? The woman spluttered. But you're only 16. There was no other option, he said, doing his best to push down his anger. Yeah, he was 16. And no, he wasn't ready. He didn't know if he ever would be. But that wasn't the point. I understand your concerns. Believe me, I feel them too. But I'm sure even this 16-year-old can give a child a better life than she would receive in the orphanage, and I owe it to her father to try. Quote, Hamamoto-san drew a sharp inhale, but Kazuhiro soldiered on. But I can't do this alone. He drew a ragged breath before kneeling before her despite her protests. I beg of you, could you please help me through this? Because he choked. I just lost the only person I had left. And I don't know what to do. Though he wasn't proud of it, he had intended to take the manipulative approach, and in a way he still was. But it seemed as if the day had caught up to him. The act dissolved, and all he could be was sincere. Kazu-kun. No, Kazuhiro-kun, she said, laying a wrinkled hand on his cheek. Raise your head, please. Quote, he didn't, because tears were running down his chin and each one of them weighed a ton. Hamamoto-san sighed. This war has taken so much from so many. You have my greatest respect for your sacrifice, and my greatest admiration for adopting that child. Of course I will help you, as much as I can. Thank you. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. He tried to pull himself together, and found the task nearly impossible. But he could fake it, for Kasaki's sake. Yoroshiku ongeishimasu, Akane Obasan sensei, he joked, and took the slight chuckle he got as a victory. Wannabe. Fanfics led me to believe that normal humans who transmigrated to the elemental nations would automatically be cognizant of their own chakra, as the energy was so foreign. That it couldn't help but stand out, sometimes to the point that it caused mild to intense discomfort. That, apparently, would be too convenient. Chakra was elusive. So elusive that, if it hadn't been iterated time and time again that chakra existed in all things living and non-living in this world, I would have given up searching. However, as an infant, I had nothing but time. I would have had no idea where to begin if not for the good doctor. When he cleared out my lungs, an experience I would do my damnedest to avoid repeating, let me assure you, he used what I assumed to be medical chakra. I'm not sure if this is canon or fanon, but I remember something about bodies rejecting foreign chakra, and that medical jutsu worked by molding the caster's chakra into something that the patient's body could accept. The explanation seemed in line with what I experienced. All I could feel in the process was the water as it swirled inside me. Herc. Just thinking of it made me nauseous. But then, 2 days later, he used another jutsu on me, one that likely had roots in medicine but didn't use medical chakra. And oh boy, that I could feel. The sensation was indescribable, and not necessarily in a good way. But even after it receded, drawing itself out of my body the same way it came in, a feeling of emptiness lanced through the affected areas as if the chakra carved grooves in my very being. Grooves that were naturally filled in an instant later with, oh. My own chakra felt better. It moved through what I knew to be its own circulatory system, filling the empty grooves and soothing them like aloe gel over a sunburn. As soon as my chakra settled into what I assumed was equilibrium, I lost the feeling. Gain, I chirped unthinkingly, and the doctor froze. Ah, crap. Babies don't speak. I didn't necessarily want to follow the stay under the radar philosophy that many FIC protagonists abided by, but this was AB. It much. If Konoha had Danzo and Root, I was certainly had something worse. I've never heard a peep out of you before, he murmured, and I would have slapped a hand over my forehead if I had the arm strength and didn't know my dome was, at the moment, dangerously squishy. Babies don't speak. Why would he assume I said anything intelligible? Did my chakra disturb you, perhaps? He wondered. No. Wait. I can't make him afraid to try that on me again. Give me those grooves, Doc. I gave him my best. Cute baby almost giggle, and though it was embarrassing, it seemed to do the trick. What a strange child, he murmured. Reaching out, he did what I assumed was a hand seal. I'm not weeb enough to know which one, and touched a finger to my opposite elbow. Boom. Instant grooves. My chakra rushed in to fill the voids, and I let the feeling roll through me like a freshwater stream. No, that picture was too calm. It was like an ocean, dashing its waves against a cliff face. Once it was filled, the tide began to settle into something calming once more. I didn't want that. I was no calm sea, I was a tempest, a hurricane. Something that I could feel, not something that would fade away into the background. If I lost this, and the doctor didn't see fit to give me another groove, how would I find my chakra again? Despite it being inside of me, I barely had any more control over this ocean than I did over a real one. But that didn't stop me from kicking my metaphorical feet and splashing around as much as I could. For all of 2 seconds, before a massive hand pressed itself against my side. Don't do that, he snapped, and the military brat in me recognized an order from a superior officer when I heard one. I stopped splashing immediately, to his visible surprise. He stared at me with an intensity that I had never yet suffered in this form, and a twinge of unease passed through me. Was Mr. Doctor a censor too? Did you do that on purpose? He asked, and I wouldn't have answered even if it wasn't rhetorical. I'm just a whittle baby, I don't understand words. He shook his head in bewilderment, stepping back a bit. He looked like he was caught between wanting to pace and wanting to be within arm's reach to stop me from having fun. Well, there's a first. A newborn unconsciously using chakra. Hey, off. It was totally conscious. What would I even call it if she died? He softly wondered. Sudden autonomous infantile chakra, ejection. Drainage. Maybe perforation, if the pathways rupture. Perhaps I shouldn't be messing with my chakra just yet. Breaking out of his morbid thoughts, he placed his hand back over my chest and resumed channeling what I recognized to be medical chakra. Instantly, my ocean smoothed out, becoming tranquil as the coasts of the Maldives. I grudgingly refrained from putting up a fight. I'll need to tell the kid when he returns to keep an eye out for this, he muttered, fixing me with another perplexed stare. The symptoms, not the cause. I don't see any good coming out of breathing a word of this to anyone. You're going to be a very scary lady one day, kid. Ah, beans. Yeah, I couldn't fly under the radar if I wanted to. A month old and I was already making, hee, waves. Wannabe. Approximately an hour and a half later, my boredom once again became intolerable. I blame it on growing up with the internet. Just a little nudge wouldn't kill me, right? The hurricane left an impression, but I could feel its memory fade further and further from my stupid, developed baby brain with each passing second. Before it could disappear entirely, I kicked one foot, nay, a single toe, creating the slightest of ripples. In my imagination, that ripple changed form, becoming pill-shaped and elongating as a little periscope poked out of its top. Like the easily entertained child I always was, I sent it on its way, closing my eyes as I eagerly followed its voyage. The sea it explored may have been unlike any I had ever descended into, but I would conquer it like any other. And my first step towards doing so was to learn its currents. Wannabe. This is explained in the anime, but in case you don't know, the first kanji in the written word, shinobi, is the same kanji that is used to write, to endure. That's what Kazuhiro is referring to when he is speaking to Akane. Also, Yoroshiku ongeshimasu, is a multi-purpose phrase that roughly translates to, please take care of me. I assume any anime, manga enjoyer knows this, but just in case. Home sweet home. It's nice to officially meet you, the youth in front of me said with extreme awkwardness. I am Asano Kazuhiro, your god brother, and I'm going to be taking care of you from here on out. Quote, I simply blinked at him. What? Did he expect me to introduce myself? You were the one who named me, dude. Try as I might, I could only pick up bits of that conversation, but that piece didn't escape me. He sighed, and placed me down in a carrier he had brought. I turned my head as much as I could manage to continue examining him. I wasn't great at guessing ages, and as an infant everyone looked huge, but even I could tell that Kazuhiro was young. Way too young to be entrusted with a child, especially an infant, for more than a couple hours. Apparently, nobody else shared that opinion. Old enough to kill, old enough to raise a kid, I guess. He had hair that someone from my original world would pay hundreds of dollars to emulate, dark blue lick. Early dawn, though the effect was slightly ruined by the mild greasiness of late puberty. He also had freckles, grayish eyes and a gaunt-looking face. Definitely needed a good night's sleep or 12, but given the circumstances I could grant him a pass. All in all, certainly not out of the running for anime protagonist. Too bad we didn't share genetics. Hopefully, I would turn out even wackier, in a good way. He sighed, slumping down into his seat. He was waiting for a nurse to return with documents and likely instructions. What am I doing? He moaned, and I couldn't help but cringe at the despair in his voice. It's okay, little dude, I thought. I know you'll try your best. What a shit situation he was forced into. At that moment, I internally vowed that I would make things as easy as I could for him. It was the least I could do. I died in my early 30s and never had any interest in having a kid anyway, even in vitro. But I knew people who had, so I was all too aware of how difficult it was for two adults, never mind a single teen. EUB, obey, I offered him, and his eyes widened at the noise. That's right, he's never heard me speak before. He chuckled softly as the surprise wore out. At least you're a cute kid. Hisashi, he would have loved you so much. Quote, well, that made me sad, and I never knew the dude. It wasn't the nurse who returned, but a doctor. A different one than the person who tended after me in the evenings. Bring her back for a cursory checkup every 3 days, he instructed Kazuhiro, giving him several sheets of paper. And don't hesitate to take her in early if you believe something to be amiss. Her health is fine, but any trauma at such a young age needs to be treated with the utmost urgency. Regularly monitor her chest region, and if you sense any, he lowered his voice a touch, chakra disturbances, bring her back immediately. Chakra. Kazuhiro repeated in bewilderment. What do you mean? The new doctor's gaze flitted over her new guardian's head, as if looking for eavesdroppers. As you must have experienced, chakra is intrinsically tied to our emotions. I have learned of cases where an infant's chakra lashes out against its host's body, causing catastrophic internal damage. Incredibly rare, but something we must consider nonetheless. With both her parents being Jonin, Kaseki-chan might have naturally larger chakra reserves, meaning there's a great risk. The doctor was so good at lying, medic or not, he was a ninja, that I almost believed him at face value. But then I remembered the other doctor's words several nights prior. He must want Kazuhiro to watch for signs of me messing with my chakra, I realized. I thought he said he wasn't going to tell anyone about that. Perhaps the case study he described was a real thing, and he instructed this new doctor to warn Kazuhiro about it. Whatever the reason, my god brother looked well and truly spooked by the warning. The doctor noticed as well and sighed. Just remain vigilant, and there won't be a problem, he said in an approximation of reassurance. If she begins crying, investigate. It will usually mean she is hungry or needs to be changed, but if you prod around certain areas and the crying intensifies, it might indicate she is in physical pain. Take her to the hospital immediately if that is the case. Our secretaries have been informed to fetch me or one of the other medic nin at once. Damn. He was really worried about me exploding myself, wasn't he? Kazuhiro nodded seriously. She doesn't seem like much of a crier. You can thank Kami for that, the doctor said. I've attended to her quite a bit, so I've noticed her cues. She doesn't seem to cry when babies typically do. When she's hungry, she'll make mouth sounds. When she needs to be changed, she'll flail her arms. Other than that, she's silent. Perhaps it has something to do with the vocal scarring, and the associated difficulty of producing audible sounds. The act of crying could be too difficult for her. Though she does possess an uncommon degree of intelligence beyond that. When I make my rounds at night, she always calls for food at nearly the exact same time. As if she can regulate her own schedules according to my presence, which is notoriously rare before the 12-month mark. He had attended to me quite a bit. What a strange thing to say, because I'm fairly sure I had never seen this man before today. The same doctor checked up on me each night, and he looked nothing like this guy. But why would he lie? And with such accuracy, all of his observances were right on the money. Most of those acts he mentioned had been intentional. That's good to know, Kazuhiro said, ducking his head in appreciation. Thank you for all you have done for her. Stones at the base are what makes a mountain strong, was his reply. And with that, they left, and I caught my first daytime glimpse of Iwagakure. Wannabe. Hidden villages might have started out deserving their adjective, but that approach soon grew unrealistic. Aside from Taki, none were self-sufficient, most weren't even close, so they relied heavily on imports and exports. And if merchants couldn't find the village to trade with in the first place, then there would have been a big problem. Unlike some other villages, Konoha, Iwagakure was rather subtle. Her architecture consisted of tall, cylindrical buildings that bore conical roofs and much shorter, wider houses that were squeezed in between them. Though unconvincing up close, at a distance the phallic-shaped buildings did well to blend in with the titanic mountains that surrounded Iowa on all sides but one. Other hidden villages had man-made walls, but Iwagakure's were all natural. The village, though it was more akin to a city these days, was built in rings to better maintain the illusion. At the center was the Tsuchikage's palace, along with several other important buildings that acted as the head coup-arders for the village's most illustrious divisions. More and more rings had been created in the years since. An academy was created, along with Mogaki Sho, shopping districts, and plenty of residential areas. From above, Iwagaker's disguise was less effective. The buildings, roofs blended into the ground perfectly if one were to look straight down, but approaching it from the sky brought plenty of other angles into view. And of course, any populated area would have busy streets. It had never been an issue before though, because most shinobi who held the ability to fly came from Iwa to begin with. Not that it really mattered. Iwa had never been invaded. In fact, an enemy army had only breached the land of Earth's borders 3 times in their entire history. Smaller armed forces were another story. This was due to the incredible degree of battlefield control Iwagaker shinobi with a good grasp on Doden techniques possess. Without vegetation, sand or water restricting their techniques, there was little stopping them from collapsing an enemy camp from below, hiding devastating traps or even causing avalanches. Earth jutsu may not have been as flashy as fire, lightning, wind or even water. They were rigid, unmalleable and stubborn. But, as many of Iwa's enemies discovered, it was incredibly difficult to fight when you couldn't even trust the ground beneath your feet. Wannabe. I didn't mind that Kazuhiro treated me like a junior work associate instead of a literal baby. In fact, I probably would have lost it if he spoke to me in a more age-appropriate manner. "This is the living room," he said, pulling the front door closed with a piteous screech of the hinges. The space was mostly bare, with only one seat, a wooden coffee table. Did they have coffee? Oh, I really hope they have coffee, and a mobile hanging from the ceiling. I stared up at it in bemusement. Were those shuriken? Before I could tell for sure, I was carried to the next room. "Here is my bedroom, and yours for now. There's one for you across the hall, but the pamphlets recommended you stay in the same room as me in the short term." Quote. He did his required reading. He was taking this seriously. "This is your crib," he said, showing me the structure that would be my permanent residence for the near foreseeable future. It was battered and the wood was scuffed all over, but the mattress thing over it looked brand new. He deposited me inside and, turning my head, I saw his own bed. Or, rather his lack thereof. Craning my neck to the side, carefully because I knew the muscles were underdeveloped, I looked down through the slats of the crib to see a plain gray shikibuten resting on the floor. There was no other furniture in the room. Geez, Kazuhiro. This is just depressing. Maybe I shouldn't judge. This type of floor mattress, I think, was a common alternative to beds in Japanese culture, and so was minimalism. It wouldn't be cool to push my Western sensibilities on someone who doesn't share them. "Careful," Kazuhiro whispered, delicately tilting my head back up towards the ceiling and rearranging the special pillow underneath it so I was stuck in a safer position. I chirped at him, and a gentle smile crept across his face. "Oh, I think we just established a parental bond. I'll be right back," he promised, slowly pulling his finger out of my grasp. I hadn't even realized I grabbed it. "There's someone I want to introduce to you." Like he said, Kazuhiro returned with another figure in tow. Completely unable to sit up, I turned my baleful expression to the newcomer, an older woman who cooed over me as if I was, well, a baby. My appreciation for Kazuhiro went up another notch as I bore the humiliation in silence. "This is Akane Obasan," he introduced as the woman continued to prod me. "She'll be helping me take care of you." Quote. Oh, thank God. This body was so unbelievably frail. Even with my foreknowledge, I wasn't sure I could keep it alive, not with twig-like bones and unresponsive muscles. Thoughtlessly doing something normal like rolling over or sitting up could kill me. And Kazuhiro was trying, but teenage boys weren't exactly known for their caution. "I wish you had come to me before you bought this so-called Akane Obasan chattered on, fussing with the chipped wood of the crib. "I still have Atsuchi-kun's old crib. You'll find, even after she grows up, you won't be able to let such things go. Perhaps it would be good to leave it at your home," he proposed. "I won't be able to stay out of the field forever. It might be good for her to spend the night with you. If you are willing. More than willing, Akane said. What's the alternative? The daycare. This angel won't be able to find the attention she deserves there. Quote, oh, hell no. I don't want that kind of attention. Daycare please, Kazuhiro. I heard one of the matrons had an illness, and since they were too understaffed, she came in anyway. It spread amongst the kids and killed 2 of them. Quote, okay. Never mind then. Yes, I would like to avoid that, Kazuhiro said. They talked for a bit longer before excusing themselves. I thought I heard something about them going to Akane's house to go through her old baby supplies, but I had truthfully stopped listening. Ever since I first learned to feel my own chakra, I had been exploring and charting my pathways. It was relaxing and, better yet, took all my focus and attention, so it was instrumental in relieving my boredom. I could now form a submarine with but a single thought, and I nearly always had one mucking about inside me. After a couple days purposely directing my submarine around my entire body, I decided that I was being an idiot. No cartographer mapped the entire globe in one fell swoop. They started small with a single region they knew. Then they expanded, broadening their scope until all the pieces finally fell into place. So, I turned my attention to my right hand and there it remained, will remain until I'm satisfied. You wouldn't think that would take too long. At this stage, I could barely even palm a grape. But God, the chakra pathway system in my hand was so complex. There were 23 of what I knew to be called tenketsu, which I privately referred to as my ports. I formed my submarines by flexing them, which led me to believe that they are almost like muscles. They responded to signals from my brain, and allowed me to consciously move and shape my own chakra just like muscles. Between my ports were, I'm not sure if they had a name in canon, so I called them my canals. They're where most of my chakra sat normally, unmoving until I used my tenketsu to shape it to my will. Something that was incredibly tempting for me to try out on a much larger scale, though I begrudgingly are. Ephraim. With my new level of understanding, filtered through the lens of my existing knowledge of physics and mass, I could understand why the doctor didn't want me messing around. Kinda. I'm not sure if chakra took up physical space, I kinda think it has to, but I'm not really sure what mystical bullshit is going on, but I know for a fact that it can interact with the world around it. If it couldn't, Naruto's Rasengan would do less damage than a puff of smoke. My best guess was that my canals were, like the rest of my body at the moment, thin and weak. They relied on subconscious limiters and pain to keep me from irreparably damaging them by accident. It was similar to a person's more mundane muscles. Human muscles could produce a lot of force, more than the bones and joints around them could take, in fact. So the brain put subconscious limiters in place to keep them from going overboard, unless adrenaline told the brain that the situation warranted such an extreme. As a baby, this predicament was a lot worse. My muscles were smaller, yes, but my bones were a lot weaker. If I wanted to, which I obviously didn't, I could break my own arm with ease. I could tell because even the most ordinary motions, if done hard enough, caused a not insignificant amount of pain. It was the same with my canals, I presumed. As I grew older, they'd grow wider and tougher, reforging themselves until they can handle the rough movement of chakra without tearing. For now, I didn't want to risk significant injury, so I resisted the ever-present urge. There was no shortage of distractions so far. The tenketsu and canals were rather straightforward, but those two things only made up the body of the river that was my chakra. There were tributaries, a nearly countless amount. Half brought in trickles of chakra, half brought them out. My vague recollection was that physical energy, yang, would merge with the spiritual yin energy to create chakra, so I imagined that was what the chakra entering my canals was. Sure enough, my submarine fizzled out as soon as I tried to swim up it, against the current. Nothing I tried could affect it even a little, so I gave up and shifted my attention elsewhere. I was much more curious about the other tributaries anyway, the ones chakra was leaving the canals through. Where was all of that going? Once I could finally manage to form a submarine small enough, I would find out. Wannabe. Guardianship wasn't anything like Kazuhiro imagined, or anything like he feared. He had resigned himself to sleepless nights, and had expected an ever-present cacophony of wails and tantrums in between. Unexpectedly, the morning after he first took Kaseki home, Kazuhiro awoke to sunlight flitting through the blinds. She hadn't roused him, not even once. And neither did she wake him up on the second night, or third, or fourth, or ever. Kazuhiro was a chunin who had actively fought in a war. He didn't rest easily, and the slightest noise would have sparked him into alertness. Kaseki didn't even give him that. She never tried. That was extremely abnormal. Infants of this age were supposed to feed every 3 hours, give or take, but she never once woke him up between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. That totaled her to only 6 feedings a day, and she was clearly starving by the time morning rolled around. Since she wasn't going to wake him up, he set an alarm for 4 a.m. for feeding. The first time he did that, she actually made a noise, almost like she was surprised. She had also, with extreme cuteness, reached out and laid a hand on the tip of his nose as he bent down. Perhaps her lack of appetite was due to how little energy she was expending. According to the reference material he had received, the kid was strangely sedentary. Babies were supposed to be always moving in an instinctive attempt to build their muscles, but Kaseki was so still that Kazuhiro frequently grew paranoid that she had passed away under his very nose. He brought that observation to one of the doctors during her 3-day checkup, and they seemed to think it was strange but not dangerous. That all changed towards the end of the first month they were together. Kaseki remained silent and continued to stick to her body's apparently rigid schedule, but she began to move a lot. Never at night, but during the day Kazuhiro swore he saw her doing crunches and other strength-building exercises. She had been able to support her head for extremely brief periods of time since before he had even taken her in. It was rare but not unheard of for a 1-month-old to manage such a feat, but soon there was no wobbliness and she no longer grew fatigued to the point that she flopped back onto the pillow. Something that had always freaked him out. Now that she was active, her formula intake spiked dramatically. He had sprung for a new invention, a refrigerator, though he hadn't realized it had to be connected to the electrical network. That was a pain to arrange, but he managed it eventually. The whole thing cost a ridiculous amount, significantly more than the house itself, but it only put a small dent in his new overall savings. With their new refrigerator, however, he could prep baby formula en masse, and he discovered it was useful for a hell of a lot more than that. Feeding himself became far easier too. Then, his month was up, and with a surprising amount of regret, he made arrangements with Akane Obasan. Kaseki-chan would stay with her while he was away. He made his way to the hospital, and was eventually met by the first doctor, the same one who wrote Kaseki's birth certificate. I am here for a clean bill of health regarding my, chakra poisoning, Kazuhiro said formally. The doctor scrutinized him for a moment. Then, request denied. Kazuhiro recoiled. What do you mean? I mean that you haven't fully recovered, and I do not pronounce you fit to return to active duty. Quote, Sensei, he argued, thoroughly perplexed. Kaseki-chan is in good hands. She'll be fine with me gone. This isn't about your charge, the doctor lied. This is about you and your injury. Your condition is serious and you could easily die even without enemy intervention if you use your chakra. Quote, Kazuhiro almost verbally reminded the doctor that he only gave him the diagnosis to ensure he was able to take care of Kaseki, but there were people around and there was no chance the doctor had forgotten. Something else was up. There's still a war going on, he said instead. Iowa needs me. The doctor sighed, cupping his chin and hiding his mouth from lip readers in the process. Iowa doesn't need you for what's about to happen, he said lowly as Kazuhiro struggled to hear him. She needs you here. He dropped his hand. My word is final. Now if you'll excuse me, I have patients to attend to. For what's about to happen. A kernel of dread began to form in Kazuhiro's gut. Something big was on the horizon, he could just tell. And it seemed like he would be foisted on the sidelines when it occurred, for better or for worse. A Pyrrhic victory or a Lavinic defeat. Oda Masashi had been stationed in the land of grass when he was ordered to pack his things and break down the camp. Not typically something to bat an eye at, except his company was told to do it quietly in the middle of the night, and there was no relief force to trade places with them. Essentially, they were squandering every inch they had worked for in the last month. He didn't protest, even though a good friend of his died the other week in the defense of this position. Masashi put his faith in Lord Tsuchikage, and he couldn't help but feel a tremor of excitement. This didn't seem like a retreat. The entire camp was mobilized and marched southwest, hunkering down in a forward command post just inside the Earth border. They were among the first to arrive, but not nearly the last. More and more troops trickled in over the course of the next week, until what felt like the entirety of the Iwaga shinobi force was crammed into the tiny base. I heard Konoha is in the midst of routing Suna, another Chunin gossiped. They're pushing them back to the wind border. Does Lord Tsuchikage think the sand rats will cut across and try something with us next? Another asked. No. Masashi's gut told him that something more significant was about to take place. And only a couple days later, it did. The command post was emptied in silence, each ninja stern and uncompromising as the stones they modeled themselves after. Our target is Konoha, he had been told. As they overreach into the land of wind, we'll catch their northeast flank. The explosion core will tunnel underneath, planting traps before surfacing to perform a pincer attack from the opposite side. This was it. The legendary battle he had dreamed of, one that would live on in every history book written in the elemental nations. And levied against Konoha, no less, the first hidden village and the wealthiest, home to infamous clans like the Uchiha, the Senju, the Hyuga, the Aburame and many more. He approved of the strategy too. This was how ninja war was supposed to be waged, with ambushes and quick, brutal strikes. Not with bunkers and long-range ninjutsu. Masashi wasn't in a position to see their foes approach, he was underground, as was nearly every other member of the Iwagakure Jonin foe. RCES. Despite their numbers, Command knew that this strategy would work a hell of a lot better with the element of surprise, and Konoha possessed the most formidable sensory-type bloodlines. Not chakra sensors themselves. In that department, Kumo and Iwa both had them beat. But with the Inuzuka, Aburame and especially the Hyuga on Konoha's side, it didn't really matter. Remaining deep enough underground circumvented the first two clans, but the third was still a huge issue. The Hyuga could see through solid objects, including the ground itself, and pick up on chakra signatures. The only way the assembled Iwa shinobi could slip past them was by using a technique called Doden, Seishin Keseki no Jutsu, Earth Style, Spirit Stone Technique. The technique involved using a Doden nature transformation throughout the user's entire bodies, something that was incredibly difficult and dangerous. Leaving it in place too long would prove fatal, and Masashi bet that at least a couple of their Chunin would die before the first blow would even be exchanged. However, if the Hyuga were to look in their direction with it active, they wouldn't be able to distinguish their bodies from the rock surrounding them. Hopefully, everyone without a Doden chakra nature and those less competent with the technique would be forced to wait nearly a mile away from the ambush site, just in case. With the explosion core kicking off the fight, they would have no issue telling when it began. And neither would he. Masashi both heard and felt a thunderous shake in front of them and quickly exerted his will upon the surrounding earth, softening it so as not to be crushed to a pulp by the vibrations. His and his comrade's Seishin Keseki broke at that moment, so they wasted no time to rise to the surface. He found the Konoha battalion in shambles, their dead numerous. Exploding clay had been laced below the ground they uncaringly trod on, and they'd been too absorbed in celebrating their meaningless victory over the sand rats to notice. The trap had been detonated right as the center of their company passed above it, splitting the survivors into two clusters. Masashi and his comrades charged the nearest one, leaving the other for the explosion core to hold off until their distantly awaiting backup arrived. It almost seemed too easy. Until there was an ear-shattering pop, and 3 massive plumes of smoke erupted from the group they were charging. From within each arose a titan. A purple snake longer than the Tsuchikage's palace was tall, an orange toad with red markings and a pipe big enough to fit 5 of Masahi's peers inside the barrel, and a white and blue slug whose ooze sent streams of noxious vapor into the sky. The 3-way deadlock. They were here, as expected. The Sanin. But Aiwa was ready. His company quickly moved out of the way as a lava golem nearing the slug's size flowed over the ground, clumsily approaching the mammoth mollusk without a care who it crushed cremated on its way. Controlled by every member of the Kanjiki clan, this jutsu would fry the slug, and keep it from healing the decimated Konoha forces. Then, a massive goat appeared, its curled horns longer than some mountains were tall. Its plated armor-covered battle robes were marked with intricate, crimson patterns, and the behemoth wasted no time charging the toad head first. That left the serpent. Several smaller pops rang out as the Great Six of the Kamizuru clan called forth their personal summons, and a terrible buzzing fi. LLED the air. Bred at the peaks of the mountains surrounding Iwagakure, these giant wasps were formidable, though they were still only as big as the snake's oversized fangs. But they weren't alone. 3-tongued Guro rode to meet the beast on a giant, pure white bird. Explosions rang out as his projectiles singed their target's purple scales, but the creature held strong, hissing in challenge at his aerial foes. When the summoner atop its head sent forth countless smaller snakes that could kill a man with one bite, someone else sent forth a pack of mongooses to hunt them down. Aiwa might not have had as many noble summons suited for this type of combat, but the will of stone was indomitable. This was what Masashi lived for. So when a dragon made of fire, a mist technique sent by the Sandaime Hokage at the Sandaime Tsuchikage, vaporized him almost instantly. Why? The last sound that left his lips wasn't a scream or curse. It was a laugh. Wannabe. Even though Kazuhiro was a shut-in and only took me outside when it was time for my doctor's visits, I still realized it right away when the war, the Second Shinobi World War, I eventually discovered, ended. The entire time I had lived in Iowa, which was around 3 months at this point, the streets had been nearly empty, and there was an oppressive gloom that I could feel just by looking out the window. Then, that changed overnight. Well, the first part at least. There was still an ever-present air of solemnity that dampened almost every face I saw, but the amount of said faces had nearly doubled. And each one was adorned by a Iwagakure forehead protector, so it didn't take a genius to figure out that they were soldiers who had returned from war. It also didn't take genius to figure out why they were so upset, despite the war being over. We must have lost. I wanted more than anything to ask for details, but my tongue still wasn't nimble enough and likely wouldn't be for several months. I wasn't sure when babies were supposed to be able to talk, but it wasn't a lack of mental ability holding me back, just physical ability, so I would likely manage the feat early. I felt like I was living my life on quadruple speed mode, and thank for that. I would try to physically condition myself throughout the day with plenty of rest, and between workouts I would explore my chakra. That was something I never got bored of, though I would sometimes grow frustrated when I reached a tributary that was too small to fit my submarines through. Each one varied greatly in diameter, and some were just flat out unexplorable due to their size. Those were the ones I was most curious about. My senses weren't accurate enough to pinpoint exactly where they were, so I couldn't really guess where they were going. I knew there are a multitude of ways shinobi could use chakra to augment their bodies, and I also knew that there were a multitude of ways they could injure themselves doing so. I'm hoping that my exploration now would give me a head start when I reach that stage of my training. My awareness was slowly, oh so slowly, spreading up my right arm. It was close to reaching my forearm at this point. The appendage wasn't nearly as exciting as my hand, which was almost unfathomably complex. That was probably why hand signs were so integral for casting jutsu. I kept having to revisit the region as my ability to navigate my submarine grew and I could suddenly reach places that had once eluded me. In other news, Kazuhiro was depressed. I didn't know why for the longest time, but I did my best to cheer him up whenever I saw him. My best consisted of grabbing his fingers and making cute noises. To my surprise, it actually seemed to work, though not for long. The morose expression would soon force itself back onto his face shortly after. To my pleasant surprise, as she was usually rather daft and spacey when it came to anything other than child rearing, Akane Obasan not only noticed his mood, but eventually spoke to him about it. All three of us were at her home across the street, because babies needed enrichment and there was precious little of it to be found at the Asano household. It was quite lovely, what I saw of it at least. Her son's old crib had been set up in her living room, which featured a giant window that caught as much light as the sky could provide and several floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Scroll shelves. I wondered how she got them all. If this was anything like feudal Japan, they would have been difficult to get a hold of. I failed, Kazuhiro finally said, caving to Akane Obasan's nagging. I failed Hisashi, and I failed Kaseki. How do you mean, Kazuhiro-kun? Akane Obasan asked gently. I was struck back at Konoha, he said shortly, avoiding eye contact with the woman and not looking in my direction entirely. And I wasn't there. And we lost the battle. It would have been my only chance to avenge Hisashi and Mana, with the non-aggression pact Lord Tsuchi. Cage signed, I won't get another. Lost is a very strong word, Akane Obasan said hesitantly, choosing to fixate on that for some reason. We were forced to flee, he said angrily, his voice raising. Half the explosion corps is gone, most of the Kanjiki clan and Guro-sama, one of our S-ranked shinobi. Damn, we lost one of our cage-level shinobi. I'd never heard of Guro from the anime, but no one got that designation for the hell of it. People died in war, no shit. But someone that powerful. I wasn't sure when the Third Shinobi World War would start. We probably had some time left, at least. Nonetheless, dread began to curdle in my stomach. S rank wasn't enough. I'd have to be even stronger, when the time came. I had no desire to die again, not before I had a chance to live. And those are only the public losses, who knows how many of our forces have been killed besides that. What was Tsuchikage-sama thinking? Kazuhiro-kun, she admonished, looking over her shoulder as if expecting the door to be busted down. Do not say such things. You or I can't presume to know the motives of Lord Tsuchikage. There must have been a reason. What reason could there be? He cried. I don't know, but, Kazuhiro-kun, you must promise not to breathe a word of what I'm about to say to anyone. Do you swear? I was jolted out of my pity for my caretaker. His thought process might have been immature, but him's elf was also immature, so it could be excused, and he was really going through it with the death of my parents, at her words. Of all people, Ditsi Akane Obasan was the one with meaningful information. Kazuhiro promised, and the older woman sighed. My son is in a position of importance within Lord Tsuchikage's inner circle, she revealed. He confided to me that, as a direct result of the attack, he himself and Iwagakure as a whole has gained a great advantage. He wouldn't tell me what, exactly, and I knew better than to press. He also told me that, while the losses were significantly higher than expected, they underestimated not the leaf itself but the ability of its highest-ranked shinobi. Lord Tsuchikage is satisfied by the end result. Quote, it spoke volumes about the world I was reborn into that someone could say, our leader is satisfied with the result of an action that caused the deaths of many of his own people, and mean for it to be taken as a reassurance. So you see, there must be more going on here than you or I are aware of, she concluded, though I could have told her so myself if I could speak. Always look underneath the underneath. This was a ninja village, nothing was what it seemed. I still should have been there, Kazuhiro whispered, and Akane laid a gnarled hand on his shoulder. I'm sure Hisashi would have been glad you weren't, she said, and I was certain that she was correct once again. Wannabe. Months passed, and I soon found that I wouldn't be blowing past milestones nearly as fast as I thought I should. Apparently, babies ordinarily developed physically and mentally at around the same rate. So, even though I possessed the mental ability of an adult, it still took just as long for me to be able to, for example, speak, roll over, crawl, and eventually walk. Once I got to that part, however, I was unstoppable. I trained, played, constantly, something Akane Obasan only thought was cute because she didn't understand what I was really doing. Cat's cradle. That was for improving finger dexterity. The floor is lava. Apparently a real concern in Iowa with the Yoden wielders scattered about, was for nimbleness. ND footwork. And drawing. Well, that actually was for fun. But hey, it could be helpful in my future as a shinobi. You never know. Akane Obasan encouraged my talents, supplying brushes and colored inks. Not my preferred medium, but I wasn't sure pencils existed, so I made do. Kazuhiro might have been able to put two and two together regarding my self-training, but Iwagakure was struggling financially after the war's kinda sorta end. As such, all available shinobi were sent on mission after mission. And there were no shortage of things to do. With no one slinging jutsu around all over the place, merchants were eager to sell the inventories that had been piling up over the last couple years, and there was much that needed to be built. Also, Grass kinda hated Konoha now, for some reason, and decided that, out of the 5 great villages that had utterly decimated it over the course of the war, they disliked Iowa the least. That brought in a lot of business. So my official guardian wasn't home all that much anymore, leaving me at Akane Obasan's tender mercies. Really, it wasn't so bad. The older woman cared a lot, and wasn't so annoying that I found myself unable to reciprocate her feelings. It was sometimes a little off-putting how involved she was whenever she realized I was awake. She hovered a lot, babbling in baby speak as I played. Not at all like the grandma who had raised me in my last life, God rest her soul. That woman had been a much-needed foil for Sir, who was so strict that. No, there was no need to think about that. This life was supposed to be a fresh start. I did have to deal with nonsense every once in a while. Like on my first birthday, for example, when Akane Obasan decided that I should have a party. I complained, but the old bag didn't seem to piece together what I was complaining about. I could have tried harder, I suppose, but crying in general was beneath me, and crying because I wasn't getting my W. I was especially so. It was also hard. If I wanted any sound to pass through my lips, I really had to work for it, especially when said sound was in a higher register. But I digress. Akane Obasan wanted me to have a birthday party, a real one, with cake and other kids. I always hated the birthday scenes in Naruto fics, I think because I thought they were always too convenient. But then I realized, I wasn't in Konoha. I wasn't going to run into major characters and create lifelong bonds and rivalries. I wasn't going to meet some important parents and establish myself as a budding prodigy. I was a nobody orphan. Anyone who Akane Obasan could con into attending would be just as ordinary and unremarkable as I was on paper. Oh, I'm so excited. The old woman gushed. You'll get to make so many new friends. My son Atsuchi-kun passed along my invitations to some of the children of his coworkers. They're all very promising future shinobi, so this will be quite beneficial to your future. Quote, Mother. Hamamoto Atsuchi, Akane Obasan's son who I still haven't met. Who was apparently high up in Iwagakure command. His coworkers' kids were coming to this. Never mind, then. I guess I better mentally prepare for a chance encounter with an important character anyway. For better or worse. Wannabe. Ishida Udai was no longer sure where his life would take him. With their baffling defeat at the hands of Konoha, and the current, staffing issues resulting from it, all departments had to be reorganized and merged. His was no exception. In a month, the Black Tengu would no longer enjoy the autonomy they had taken for granted, and would be absorbed into the Red Ogres to form a single, elite division. But that was a headache for tomorrow. Hamamoto Atsuchi, who, due to the nature of their respective positions he worked very closely with, had invited him and his son to a meeting disguised as a birthday party for a 1-year-old his mother had taken in. At least, he hoped it was a meeting disguised as a kid's birthday party. He brought a bottle of sake in addition to the obligatory gift, a rubber kunai, just in case. It was a good thing too. The bastard didn't so much as make an appearance. Yudai would learn the following morning that he got caught up in a project and simply forgot. Still, it wasn't as if he was the only one Atsuchi invited. He saw one of his division captains with his kid, a couple he recognized from the Doi clan with a boy, an administrator with his daughter, and a handful of other, somewhat notable figures. Ishida-kun, a frail voice called out in greeting, and he looked up with a smile. Hamamoto-san, he returned, smiling at the elderly woman. You remember Iwao, don't you? Of course, she replied, bending down and pinching his cheeks. His son squirmed in agitation, but Yudai's firm hand on his head kept him from pulling away. Quiet as ever, isn't he? He might get on well with the birthday girl. Once they had taken off their shoes, she led them to the dining room, where, at the end of a long, snack-laden table, was the girl in question. She was in a high chair, but Yudai's first impression was that she didn't belong there. She sat without even the slightest hint of a slouch, and her eyes locked with his immediately, only straying briefly to give his son a passing, dismissive gaze. He felt like he was facing a member of his own Tengu, not a year-old child. This is Ishida Yudai, she introduced to the girl, something he found slightly bizarre. And his son, Ishida Iwao. Yudai-kun, Iwao-kun, meet Mai Kasaiki. Quote. Yudai examined her, curiosity piqued. Kasaiki, he clarified. What a peculiar name. The elderly Hamamoto sighed. Yes, quite. She was a survivor of the Fugataro incident. Her parents were veterans living there. They didn't survive. She was only a month old then. She is now officially in the care of her god brother who adopted her, but he's away on missions. He's the one who gave her that name. He nodded, mood dampened by the reminder. He recalled the incident in question vividly. It was a catalyst for many changes in Iwa. His village might not have even agreed to Kumo's temporary alliance if not for it. The promise of sealing knowledge was enticing, sure, but the pound of flesh was more so. Ishida-san, a small voice chimed in, and Yudai looked up in shock. Ishida-kun, Yoroshi kuo ne ga ishimasu. Extremely taken aback, Yudai glanced back and forth between the tiny girl and Akane. Did she just? He trailed off. Isn't Kasaiki-chan the cutest? The older woman squealed. She's been practicing that all week. The little girl huffed in annoyance and looked away, as if embarrassed that her caretaker had revealed that. Did you teach her that? He asked dubiously, because that was an extremely well-enunciated sentence for a 1-year-old. Also, he doubted the girl had received a guest list and memorized all the names on it, so his surname couldn't have been rehearsed, right? It was clear the syllables would have run together, but it was also clear that she recognized that and chose to space them out to compensate. Prioritizing clarity over speed and a more natural, if garbled, sound. He also noted that her voice was strangely hoarse. No, Kasaiki-chan is so smart, she picked that up herself. And, she wanted to greet her guests properly. Huh, he said, a little stumped. How long has she been speaking? Quote, she said her first word over a month ago, Hamamoto-san said proudly. No, then arigato. Now, she pulls out phrases she hears at the drop of a hat, when she chooses to speak that is. Talking at all is difficult for her, due to a chronic injury from that night. Quote, no to arigato was a big jump. Arigato had 4 kanas, syllables. Very interesting, he muttered, surprisingly not lying in the least. It is nice to meet you Kasaiki-chan. Iwao is 2.5, so he's a little older than you are. Do you know when you'll be 2.5? Kasaiki's eyes flashed. O.C. Tober, year 110. Yudai, if he would get a correct answer at all, expected her to say a year and a half from now. The answer she gave was far more impressive. What do you want to be when you grow up? He asked. A she no by, she said immediately. Why? He retorted immediately, and her face lost its aloofness. The corner of her lips tweaked upwards in almost amusement. Why not? Wannabe. Yudai kept a close eye on Kaseki for the duration of the night, but it was clear the other guests wore her out. The children especially. They were all quite a bit older than her, and though most were forced to be there and quite resigned and subdued as a result, some were excitable. And likely attention-starved, with their parents always working. Then, Hamamoto-san announced it was time for cake. She set the dessert in front of the birthday girl, lit with a single candle, and Kaseki bore the ensuing, off-pitch singing with the stoicism as a true shinobi. Okay. Blow out the candle, Kaseki-chan. Her caretaker encouraged. The child regarded the flickering flame in front of her for a moment, and Yudai briefly wondered if the song had done more damage than he thought. But then, she reached out with her hand. No, Kaseki-chan, don't touch, the elderly woman cried with a start, but it was too late. Kaseki pinched the burning wick tightly between her fingers, snuffing it out without even the slightest wince. Kaseki-chan, Hamamoto-san scolded, fretting over her slightly singed fingers, but it seemed the girl had lost interest. Though she did help herself to a hefty slice of cake when offered, lackadaisically eating with her opposite hand as the older woman applied an unnecessary amount of burned salve tea. Oh, her tiny digits. Before he left the Hamamoto abode, Yudai made plans with Hamamoto-san. Every Tuesday night, Kaseki would have a playdate with Iwao, because he was certain the girl would grow up to do big things, and he wanted his son to influence and be influenced by her growth. Additionally, as head of intelligence, he felt it was prudent to watch over an individual born outside of the village, with parentage highly suspected but not confirmed. Who exhibited intelligence well beyond what should be expected of someone her age, and whose arrival in Iwagakure was the result of an unexplained and meritless attack by the Hidden Leaf Village. Each time he dropped off and picked up Iwao, he performed a scan of some kind on the girl, probing for hidden seals or mental conditioning. Each time, he left both disappointed and relieved, because there was nothing to be found. The phrase Pyrrhic victory was named after one King Pyrrhus, who defeated the Roman armies at a great loss to himself. The commander he fought against was Publius Valerius Lavinus. Credit to Brad DeLong for coining the term. Iowa needed some stronger shinobi. They're supposed to be one of the strongest hidden villages, which to me means they should have a handful of people who are A rank and up. So I created some 3 guesses as to Goro of the Three Tongues abilities, although he was killed by Orochimaru.